Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for answering. Let's try it again. Good evening, everyone. Awesome. What a great crowd. Um, so, as you know, UT has a lot of traditions, right? And this is one of the many traditions of the university that I think that is great. That is to allow an opportunity to the assistant professor that is going for promotion and tenure to present the work that, in this case, Rana Abudayyeh has been doing for the last few years towards this trajectory of showing excellence in research, teaching, and service. And today we are here to learn from Rana one more time all together and learn about the work and the scholarly and creative work that she has done. For all the students in the room, how many of you know what tenure is about? Okay, there are like 5 hands. Let me tell you, I have 3 kids. This is worse than labor, okay? And why do I say this? It's painful and exhausting, and it lasts more than the few hours of labor. It usually lasts 5 years, 6 if you're in the middle of a pandemic, 7 maybe. But working in higher education is unlike any other job. As an assistant professor, you are hired on a probationary basis, right? What it means is, you know the famous saying, you are innocent until proved guilty? Well, in academia, it's exactly the opposite, right? You may be good until you prove that you are pretty good, okay? And this is what tenure is about. And we, you know, everyone who has gone through a tenure track needs to prove that you are excellent in research with the venues where you publish your work or your creative scholarship. If you make things more than if you write, you need to prove that you are an excellent teacher, and you need to prove that you are an amazing human being servicing the school, the university, the college, the community, the profession, and everyone else, right? So as you can imagine, there is a lot. But on top of that, it's the only job that I know that everyone has an opinion about if you should get a promotion or not, right? Usually in a typical job, your boss, 2 or 3 more people. When you're going for tenure, Reina submitted her dossier. Her dossier goes to external reviewers, to professors in another universities. They write an opinion about the work, and it comes here, and all of us write an opinion about the work, and then it moves up the ladder, right? So there is a lot of, imagine just, I don't know, a manager from Apple asking someone in Google if the person in Apple should get a promotion. It's ridiculous, right? That's what every single one of your teachers have gone through. So each time you see them, just pay your condolences, say, I'm so sorry, okay? But this is why we are here today. So with that said, and to keep with the traditions, Klehr introduced last Monday to Maguette, who is also a faculty member from architecture that is going for tenure. And Klehr kind of presented Maguette's research in Latin. So to just keep the tradition, I'm going to introduce Reina in Spanish, okay? So here it goes. Rana Abudayyeh es una profesora asistente de la Escuela de Arquitectura de Interiores de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño de la Universidad de Tennessee. Get it? Awesome. So, I'm going to continue in Italian. Il suo lavoro misura una moltitudine di traiettorie convergenti situate all'intersezione tra produzione digitale avanzata, rappresentazione e giustizia sociale. Got it? Okay, now be more compassionate about my accent, as I'm going to really introduce her in English, okay? So, Rana is an assistant professor and the Robin Klehr Avia Professor of Interior Architecture at the University of Tennessee, College of Architecture and Design. She earned her Bachelor's of Art in Architecture and Master of Architecture degree from the University of New Mexico. Her work gauges a multitude of converging trajectories situated at the intersection of advanced digital making, representation, and social justice. Abudayyeh critically investigates the architectural systems and social forces that define resilient environments, catering to cultural identities, through her teaching, research, and service. She joined the faculty of UT, Knoxville in 2015. Previously, she worked at Anthony Predok Architect on numerous design competitions and federal, public, and private projects. She's a licensed architect in her native country, Jordan, where she's currently researching interiority and displacement. Abudayyeh's teaching and research has been recognized through a number of awards and fellowships that include the Interior Design Educator Council Teaching Excellence Award, which she won this past March. And this is one of the highest awards and honors bestowed on an educator in our field. This award is also preceded by being named 2019 Most Admired Educator in Interior Design by Design Intelligence, receiving 2 consecutive Patrick Lawson Teaching Awards from the College of Architecture and Design, and being the first recipient of the Robin Klehr Avia Professorship. Established by UTK alumni Robin Klehr Avia, Regional Manager Principal of Chancellor. This endowed professorship recognized faculty excellence in the college. In discussing Abudayyeh's appointment, Ms. Klehr Avia said, "I am thrilled that Professor Abudayyeh received the professorship. Her body of work, evidence of success in the studio, compassion for her students, and groundbreaking research represents the best that faculty can be." She has taught all of you through the representation classes that you have your first year, and then many of you were lucky enough to have her again in studios. Last year, I nominated Rana for this IDEC Teaching Excellence Award that she won. And I remember that I reached out to students that she had in the past, and I asked them, can you write a paragraph about Rana? Right? I was new here. I didn't know if she was a good person or not, so just in case, I asked the students. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that the students wrote me back. By the way, I sent an email to 15 students, the ones that she had the semester before, and the 15 of them reply, which speaks very highly of her, right? And their willingness to share what they thought. But I'm not going to read to you the 15. I'm going to read some, okay? So student number 1 said, Rana puts in the same, if not more, time than her students do. She's willing to do whatever possible in order for her students to succeed and to progress. Another student said, Rana puts 125% into her students. I have never had a teacher who had invested in me and my work as much as she has. I have never learned more this semester than I ever thought possible, and it's because of Rana. She's extremely challenging, but she pushed me. And now when I look back at my work that I have produced this semester, I feel so proud. Another student says, and you will see this is like a constant, very hard. She pushed me. She pushed me to my limits for potential, but ended up with a great project and much farther ahead than I thought that I would be, as well as in a much better place than I thought I would have been with other professors. She gave so much of her own time to help me outside the class and genuinely cares about our well-being, our grades, and the product in the class. And another student said, her teaching style is honest but helpful, which is very useful when looking for directions in a project. She cares deeply for her students and looks to help them succeed in every way possible. Rana expects a lot of her students, but at the end result speaks for themselves. I have never had a more demanding professor in terms of amount of work expected and quality of project concept. However, it has been one of the most rewarding semesters I have ever had. I am proud of the work that I produce, and I would never have been able to achieve that without a teacher like Rana. Even though she's tough, her dedication to her students makes you want to work even harder. And then the last student says, Rana has been the most supportive and encouraging professor I have had these days. Her teaching style is graceful, but also difficult. I have never been pushed more to do incredible work more than this studio. Due to the encouragement and love from Rana, I always wanted to push myself to do better, and I know that is true for every other person in our studio. Always accessible, willing to help, and be there anytime. Just incredible. And at this point, you can all tell that she pushes you very hard. She's very compassionate. She's incredible. And the work that the students produce is just amazing, right? But then, let's talk a little bit about her research, right? Professor Abudayyeh has published her work in nearly every possible peer-reviewed journal suitable to her scholarship. in the journal Interiors, Design, Architecture, Culture, Interiority, Idea Journal, in Adaptive Reuse Journal, in the Science magazine that is super hard to publish, right? This not only is an enviable track record over a 5-year period, nearly half of which was during the pandemic, right? But also is a clear testament to the reach and impact of her contributions to the field, both nationally and internationally. In addition, her work has also appeared in a range of venues that foster interdisciplinary thought and action. Her role in multidisciplinary projects, such as the project that she did with Plants and Science, that was the one that was in the Science magazine, verifies the significance of her work beyond the conventional boundaries of interior architecture. I would like to continue by thanking the people who were able to attract Rana to move her family to Knoxville and to believe and join the UT community. And in order to do that, I would like to first thank the first committee, the committee that brought her when she was a visiting professor, and that is with the chair was David Matthews, Liz Teston, Lisa Molikin, and Ryan. Thank you for attracting her here. And then again to the committee that hired her as an assistant professor and believed that she would be excellent in teaching, research, and service within 5 years. And that's Liz again, Gregor, David as the former director of the school, and to Dean Poole as the former dean of the college that also attracted Rana. I also want to thank Brian Ambrosiak because, Brian was Rana's mentor, and he was probably responsible in part of making sure that Rana could be as successful as she could. And to our Dean Jason Young, who supported her when he was the Director of Architecture and now as the Dean of our Community of Learners. And last and foremost, to his family, her husband, Jared, and his kids, Jasper and Joel. Thank you for lending us your mom and your wife for all these years that you barely got to see her. Thank you to the pandemic, that at least they saw you a little bit more. And Rana, thank you. It is inspiring and pleasurable to have you as a colleague, being as productive as you are and being as human and kind as you can. We are all better because you are here. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Milagros, for this introduction, and thank you all for coming this evening. My heart is full, and my nerves are high seeing this turnout. But before I start, I have to acknowledge a few things, so please bear with me. Where I stand today is enabled by those who forged the path ahead of me, the activists, the revolutionaries, the dreamers, the game changers. For an immigrant to pursue and realize her dreams despite stifling waves of marginalization and resistance is a testament to the collective efforts of positive change. I'm ever indebted to my mentors, colleagues, co-workers, and students. My heartfelt thanks to your assistance, guidance, critique, and encouragement. I'm grateful to my family for their unwavering support, love, and patience. Special shout out to Rob and Klehr Avia, whose faculty sponsorship has also enabled much of this work, in addition to the funding opportunities afforded to me by the Dudley Faculty Scholar Award, the IDEX Special Project Grants, and the Alma and Hal Regan Award. I would particularly like to acknowledge my research assistants. This work is fueled by your dedication and support. Scott Hickman, Jacob Moore, Nadine Razawi, Michael Swartz, Brendan Wallace, Lydia Russell, Grace Ann Altenburn, Carson Fisher, Gianna Noel, and Patrick Keogh. Thank you. I thought long about how to deliver this lecture, and I spent countless hours trying to figure out what to say to convey the past 5 years. giving account of such formative time in my career is a task that required digging a bit in the past. So my contract states that my tenure track clock started in August 2017. But what I wanted to present to you today is not only work that occurred during that period, but also stories and narratives that lie beneath it. By incorporating these snippets, I hope to give you a peek into events that shaped my convictions. Further, these stories formulate the framework for my spatial thinking. Embedded in this presentation are 3 personal stories that set up the personal vantage of my research, and more importantly, have shaped me as a thinker and a human. I would like to start with this diagram that charts themes in my research, teaching, and service. Don't freak, it does that, so it's okay, it comes back, so it comes back. So again, I would like to start with this diagram that charts themes in my research, teaching, and service, which are the 3 areas that faculty engage in. While these areas are distinct, my trajectory in all of them intertwine. Today, I will start with research and work my way back to teaching. My approach to interior architecture operates within 2 reciprocal themes that also inform my scholarship of teaching. The first is design as cultural agency, and the second is interior ethology. The term ethology refers to the study of visceral behavior under natural conditions. Human ethology, a subsidiary of this body of knowledge, bridges biological and social sciences to understand human behavior, cognition, and affect. So what do I mean by interior ethology? Our innate need to withdraw into space, define and be defined by it, is at the heart of what I describe as interior ethology. It is where I establish my research, scholarship, and teaching. Interior architecture is at the core of human habitations and ultimately habits. Driven by this understanding, my work explores interior architecture as an inherent human need, underwriting affiliations and identities, hence a core human right. Much of my research these past years have dealt with interiority and displacement. What seeded this trajectory in my thinking and approach is my first story of the evening. As some of you know, I was born and raised in Jordan. I grew up in a small town west of the capital Amman called Fahais. My brothers and I went to the same K-12 school in Amman. Daily for 12 years, we took the same route back and forth from our school. Now, the Middle East is a patriarchal community. So your identity, your religion, your nationality, everything really, you get from your father's side. Until I was 16 old, I knew only of that side of my identity. That is until one specific encounter in fall of '93, on the drive back from school. What you are looking at here is an aerial view of my town, Fahais, on my right-hand side, and the outskirts of Amman, the capital, on the left. The dark triangle in the middle is actually a grove of tree where the palace of the King of Jordan is, and we would use to cross that on a daily basis. There's at that intersection a small roundabout. This is a close-up of it. So every day in the afternoon at that roundabout, it'll be packed with people. And those are people who are trying to stop the king's motorcade and pass him messages, making requests for themselves or for relatives. Most of the time, there would be refugees making requests for citizenships. One day on that normative path, the people I saw there were my maternal aunt and uncle. During this time, I learned about another facet of who I am. I'm a descendant of Palestinian refugees who were forced to abandon their lives and livelihoods in Palestine in 1948 and come to Jordan. And while I knew that my mother was of Palestinian descent, I was never told of the specific details of my grandparents' journey. My objective this evening was not to cry. That's what I told myself, don't cry. So here goes. If you are wondering why that is, it is because refugees, in the best of cases, are still marginalized and made to feel lesser than others in many ways. But let's get something clear. No one becomes a refugee by choice. And refugees, despite the hardships and discrimination and scarcity they endure every single day, are resilient individuals and resourceful societies that have much to offer the local and global communities. In the book After Belonging, Klehr Esterling calls for a rethinking of a refugee as rejected populations. Instead, she indicates that the passage of a refugee and their endurance is a special credential that should capture the global imagination as a story about being released from the conflicting logics of sovereignty. She states, a refugee story is not about those who belong nowhere. Rather, it's about those who belong everywhere. My own research about refugee camps arrives at similar conclusions, showcasing camps as resilient cities and speculating on the role of design as a platform for empowerment rather than of provision. Again, don't freak out. I'll drink some water. So why study displacement in Jordan? Hopefully my first story shed light on the personal drivers. But also Jordan offers an intense realm for studying the refugee condition. Jordan is a small kingdom located in the heart of the Middle East, a kingdom with very few natural resources and a severe scarcity of water. About 11% of the total population in Jordan are refugees, and this number does not take into account 2 million Palestinian refugees and their descendants that were granted citizenship in 1954. Factoring that in raises that number to 18%, making Jordan the country with the most number of refugees relative to population in the world. Refugee camps are complex entities that are at the intersection of a triad of authority. The first is the UNHCR, which refers to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the host countries, and a vast number of NGOs. The politics of this matrix are inherently complex. For instance, the land on which the camp sits is leased by the UN from private landowners or allotted by the host government. The host country often provides policing and security, a trippy equation of power to say the least. Sustaining the camp's daily function depends largely on NGOs that stem from various countries, as you can see here in this diagram. Population growth in camp is often exponential, and while it fluctuates at times, it sustains continual increase. In this slide are 3 camps in Jordan that my research focuses on, in comparison to other camps in nearby countries. Once a refugee camp gets established, rarely does it cease. Displaced individuals never return to their country of origin and must live in an ongoing ongoing condition of statelessness. These are views of 3 camps in Jordan that I decided to focus on, because each offer a unique set of parameters and conditions. So from the top down, the first one up top is Al-Baqa Camp City, which opened in 1967, and it's home to 119,000 registered Palestinian refugees. The type of this camp is protracted displacement camp city. The second one, which is in the middle, is Al-Zatari Refugee Camp, which opened in July 2012. At its peak, it housed 150,000 Syrian refugees, becoming the 4th largest city in Jordan. And the type of that camp is emergency encampment or a makeshift city. And the last one, which is in the bottom, is Al-Azraq Refugee Camp, which opened in April 2014 to account for the influx of Al-Zatari with Syrian refugees. And that is home right now to 35,000 Syrian refugees. The Al-Azraq is an example of a pre-planned refugee community. This diagram shows the evolution of refugee camps from the singular shelter unit to a dense urban cluster. Based on this understanding, I tried to devise design strategies for intervention within these settings. In the back of my head, I want to accomplish a few things. 1, to tell the refugees' narrative in an honest and also empowering way. 2, to employ representation and digital tooling to advance a new approach to refugee-centered design that combines local skills and advanced making as a framework for intervention. 3, I also wanted to learn from what works in camps, ideas, approaches introduced by residents, and reuse those in ways that establish agency and autonomy in camp settings, but also elsewhere. I say this because I have to come to learn that the production of space and territory in refugee camps offer agile development patterns applicable to placemaking anywhere. This photo gives you a sense of the fabric of Al-Zatari, which is the Syrian refugee camp that has 150,000 occupants, just like I explained. I just want you to get a sense of where it is right now in relationship to the diagram that I just show you. So it is at this stage where the caravan or the shelters have been remodified by users and appropriated to accommodate their familiar structures and their way of living. So it's somewhere in the middle of that diagram. So before proposing design strategies and interventions in Al-Zatari, I was trying to understand the process of displacement and its many iterations. I compared the Palestinian diaspora of 1948 to the more recent Syrian situation of 2012. Outside the politics, two key differences existed between the two that made a huge difference in the camp's development patterns. And those two are actually the prefabricated flat-packed shelter and portable technology. The flat-packed shelter made it faster to accommodate the refugees and transition them from tents to caravan units. More importantly, it also offered a kit of parts that could be modified and traded more easily. The other aspect is portable technology, exemplified by the cell phone. Having access to portable technology allowed Syrian refugees to carry at least fragments of their memories and identities with them. And also cell phone became a means of documenting their struggles and disseminating their accounts, which harnessed global awareness and accountability, an advantage that Palestinian refugees did not have access to. Another aspect that is unique to the Syrian refugee camps in Jordan is where they got established. While the Palestinian refugee camps were established near big cities, Al-Zatari was located in the northern Jordan desert, 7.5 miles from the border with Syria, and near a small Jordanian village of Al-Zatari, which is the camp's namesake. The location of the camp strategically formed a connection with the existing rural community of Al-Zatari village. Displacement was meaningful in a number of ways. Logistically, the camp's economic and social development and advancement became linked to Al-Zatari village. Theoretically, it also kept the Syrian populace away from the sight and mind of the Jordanian citizens, who were already struggling under economic and political instability. Another benefit to this location was that it enabled the camp to function with autonomy and establish businesses within the camp that attracted visitors from the entire country seeking Syrian goods and merchandise. The camp became a thriving economic hub. With these realities and in terms of design, I started to ask what could be deployed within such sites preemptively to accommodate the establishment of various configurations for living that can fluctuate and change. So instead of rethinking the shelter unit, I proposed a structural system that would allow clusters to occur and grow. These strategies allow for mitigating the harsh climate and barren nature of the desert, introducing shade pockets and exterior gathering spaces, while facilitating the future development of water infrastructure and plumbing. So the following 3 slides illustrate the deployment of those ideas in rural camps like Al-Zatari, accounting for the permanent temporality of the camp, which is, I mean, it's a contradicting term, but it's a true term, because it's a permanent state of temporality that refugees live in. So the photos on the left, the photos on my left are from Al-Zatari camp, showing the current fabric of the camp and the need for proper plumbing system, as what you can see in the lower photo is actually open sewer that collects in makeshift plumbing trenches. Today, this has been one of the more challenging issues in the camp, and kids fall in those and die all the time, by the way. So this image shows how this deployment of the structure might be adapted and occupied by the residents, stabilizing vertical growth while creating spaces below on the ground that can be used as markets and community gathering spaces. Again, here you can see pictures from the camp and the occupants' desire to utilize exterior spaces and customize their interior spaces. Systems as such are not new. Le Corbusier's Domino House was designed as a prototype for a physical platform for mass-produced housing. The same logic is at work here, but that is where the role of the architect stops, allowing the refugees to configure, cluster, drape, and modify the community and living units as needed, leaning on traditions learned from vernacular construct, like the Bedouin tent seen in the upper left-hand corner. Similar concepts could be employed in urban camps like Al-Baqa camp seen here in this photo, albeit intervening here is more tricky logistically and politically. There is also another set of concerns that operate in Al-Baqa, those are the tensions between the Palestinian refugees and the locals. Policing the camp is extensive, and the camp struggle with severe lack of public spaces that are geared towards building community. In urban camp setting, where protracted displacement occurs, intervention takes on a different nature, governed by existing densities and adjacencies. Growth can only happen vertically, where pockets of space can be found in the dense built fabric. To better explore this, I tried to model and code the cluster in the camp and find areas for seeding a formal intervention that can function as multi-purpose community spaces. These interventions would rely on existing construction practices that leave rebars extended and exposed in anticipation of future growth and expansion. Rooted in time, this process will seed community nodes throughout the urban camp, aiding in fostering a collective agency where placemaking is an interwoven communal activity. These diagrams suggested how such process may take place. This growth results in intricate spaces and urban rooms. Intervention acts as such challenge the limitations set on refugees in camps that are often excluded from the rights and services enjoyed by citizens, allowing them to build and expand with minimal engagement with the ground surface. That you may recall is leased from the UN, from local communities or governmental entities. The construction of such expansions will be informed by local construction practices, using adobe and earthback construction. Such building practices are sustainable and can respond effectively to local climate and fluctuating daily and seasonal temperatures. Most importantly, these construction methods have always been community-based events, a catalyst for rooting collective identities both literally and figuratively. My work on displacement has been disseminated through a number of venues, and I'm still working through the support of the Dudley Faculty Award on expanding this research and actually trying to visit those camps next spring, hopefully. My plan was to actually go this past summer, but a lot of those spaces were closed because of COVID. They didn't allow external access for the safety of the refugees and people coming. This article titled Dynamic Landscape Emerging Territories was published in the AMPS journal. And in that article, I actually discussed the relationship of the impact of technology on refugee camps. The article got picked up by a number of news outlets. One in particular featured in the big issue out of the UK used a particularly creative title to describe the research, and they called it Home is Where the Smartphone Is. I didn't come up with this title, but I thought it's very creative nonetheless. But it's, again, taking this idea of archiving your memories on a cell phone and using that as a catalyst to alter the camp to suit local traditions that you bring with you. More recently, a chapter in a book titled Informality and the City got published. The chapter is titled Pop-Up Cities, Refugee Camps Between Transience and Resilience. And in this chapter, I distinctly discussed the differences between Al-Zatari and Al-Bakha camp and design interventions and what made each of them successful, or in the case of Al-Bakha, not successful. This is a tale of two camps. On the side over there, that's Al-Zatari, which is the Syrian camp. And the one over here is the Al-Bakha camp. Because Al-Zatari opened to economic development, it became a thriving hub in a matter of years. Al-Bakha, which is the urban camp, in contrast, although it looked more built up, it really functions as an open-air prison. So shifting gears momentarily, I'm going to jump into my research into green walls, and you'll say, how, what? I'm getting to that part of the story, I promise. But parallel to my work in displacement, in 2018, I began a collaboration with Dr. Neil Stewart from the Plant Sciences Department at UT. We worked on developing smart green wall systems that utilize synthetically engineered plants to monitor the interior air quality and alert occupants to the presence of VOCs in the interior. So while Dr. Stewart's lab worked on designing the plants, my research assistants and I worked on designing the wall. And we started first with a normative green wall system that you see here, But later we got interested in really pushing the envelope of what those green walls are. So with the help of Rebecca Roger, who was an RA in the plant sciences department, we actually started to experiment with 3D substrate and different plant species. So here we're using moss and different variations of 3D print to create variations within the wall. This system was great, but it was high maintenance. It's really hard to grow moss in a lab, like really hard. So we decided to go to something more sustainable and easy to assemble. But we decided that maybe we can think of this stackable 3D wall system that instead of using a dirt substrate or even hydroponics, we use like those simple container things, and they're called containers, that you can plant. No, seriously, they're very efficient. But I mean, it's a good way to start. Like if a plant dies, it's an easily replaced. You can just take it out and toss it, and they're fairly cheap. So we designed those modulars. Jacob would take them to Rebecca. Rebecca would plant them. We would come back and check on them. So it was a really kind of fluid interdisciplinary collaboration that worked really well for both of us. But the development of that system actually helped us create variation in the wall, in the surface of the wall, that enabled integration of the built-in furniture and systems, turning the green wall into a living wall, where not only plants live, but people also occupy. So throughout developing this system, I was also thinking of how can it be deployed in refugee settings? How could it be used inside and outside the shelter units? So we kept experimenting with different framing systems and different ways to conceive the wall. And one of our latest iteration was designing a system that is completely freestanding and fully modular. So when we developed this system, it was with the intention of deploying it in a remote setting. So each modular you see here is actually could be printed on a standard 3D printer bed, which opens the possibility for use in refugee settings. So while we were developing that, Rebecca actually started planting potatoes in those containers using the walls. And we were relatively, like she was, we didn't plant anything. But she was successful. No, we did. I killed plants, I'm serious. But like she was successful of planting and harvesting potatoes from that wall. And here's where the connection actually happened. So if we go back to the refugee settings, by the UN policy, refugees are prohibited from cultivating land in their host countries. That's not allowed. So we thought, okay, that rule exists. I mean, there's like, this is actually astroturf in there because Jordan will never grow grass that looks like that. But instead, like again, you know, and the planting here are sort of under the eye, if that's the term. So we thought that would be ideal. You know, they specify don't cultivate the land, but there's nothing against vertical farming. So from there, we start to experiment with how to integrate this wall in the exterior and the interior of the camp units, knowing that refugees often use exterior spaces as a place of gathering, and in the interior, they're in need also of systems that actually separate and segment the interior in interesting ways. And this system that we developed also doubles as an interior water reservoir, because refugees actually have to like move water on a daily basis from watering tanks across the camp. So that could be another way to also hold the water in the shelters, if you will. So our vision for the refugee camps such as Al-Zatari, is to be a thriving plug-in city that allows residents to design their settings and strategically provide for their needs and long-term sustenance. Just going to take a break, just a short one. So this was chapter 1 of the story. So moving on to chapter 2, recognizing my layered identity and committing to representing the narrative of the refugees was an integral part of my spatial understanding that started with the encounter that I told you about in chapter 1. The architectural development of those ideas was rooted in my professional work and career as a graduate student. In this image, I'm showing you 2 events that occurred at the same time in my career. The aerial view in the back is of the Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg, a project that I was fortunate to work on during my time at Antoine Predock Architect. A few months before that project started, I was completing my graduate thesis at the University of New Mexico, and the image on top is part of my thesis book. So the Canadian Museum of Human Rights was the first of its kind to be dedicated to human rights. The office won this project through a competition. The project documents a human journey with symbolic routes to the earth, where you enter through rammed earth masses, leading visitors through a journey that culminates with an ascension to the sky. The occupant traverses the interior on travertine ramps, moving through the narratives of the exhibit spaces that are echoed in the architecture. Working on this project reinforced my belief in the impact of design, even when at times I began to question that. Titled Towards an Architectural Humanity, a play of words and a challenge to Le Corbusier's Toward an Architecture, my graduate thesis introduced various micro-interventions within the city to cater to the homeless population of Albuquerque, a large percentage of which are veterans dealing with mental illness. During my thesis, I developed a friendship with a homeless veteran named Anthony. Looking at the city through his eyes was an extremely enlightening experience. Only through my interaction with him did I learn to see him, not as a victim, but an active contributor and partaker of the city's narrative. I have carried those lessons learned from those encounters with me throughout my research trajectories. And most recently, and supported by an interior design educator's special project grant, I was able to investigate the micro-urban commons in Knoxville and project interventions within this urban fabric. So what are the micro-urban commons? The micro-urban commons are liminal spaces within the urban fabric, integral to the city's function and identity. They include shared settings, such as verges, alleys, sidewalks, and bus stops, and objects such as buses, benches, canopy, and signage, catering to the user's mobility, respite, and overall presence in the city. Across their shared platform, the micro-urban commons possess the potential for activating communal interactions and transactions within the built environment that seed non-confrontational approaches to stereotypes and prejudice. The premise for this project was actually inspired by Rosa Parks' act of peaceful resistance, launched from the interior space of a Montgomery public bus. Parks' act challenged entrenched racism and helped usher in the civil rights movement. Her poignant dissent to a broken world still resonates today and draws attention to an underexplored realm of public space, which are the micro-commons exemplified by the bus interior. So going back to the research with that understanding in mind, and Knoxville as our case study, I had a great, throughout my experience here, I just want to do another shout out for my research assistants because they're incredible and they carried this project through and through. But we decided to actually look at 4 different areas in Knoxville and study the micro-commons that make those areas. So those areas are Sequoia Hills, the UT campus, Mechanicsville, and downtown. So we studied all of them separately. We did collages to document their fabric and their urban identities. And then we pinpointed various systems at play in the 4 sites. And we looked at everything that we can think of. So here, in this small text are literally everything and anything we can locate, from nature to ecology to infrastructure to amenities to history to media. And again, we located them the best we can. To our surprise, this is Sequoia Hills, okay? So, the least actually services and amenities were in Sequoia Hills. It's as if with the lack of micro-comment, it's counterintuitive because you'd assume that a richer neighborhood would have more services, but actually it's the opposite because their services are common spaces. So, it makes sense that they would not exist in a neighborhood that's trying to keep its visitors to a minimum. But we also did a visual atlas cataloging all those micro-commons in Knoxville, and this is just a glimpse into it. And we decided, based on that research, we decided to study 3 micro-commons and look at how they actually tie and interweave the city together. So those are the bus stop, and the public elevator. And we chose those 3 specifically because the bus stop, and public elevator subtly deposit the city in frames and episodes for reading and occupancy. And those 3 micro-commons are accessible to a multiplicity of reading and engagement due to their tangibility, repetition, and diverse occupancy. So we took the bus, dissected it, tried to understand it, did the same for bus stop, just trying to do those exercises of really being rigorous about just interrogating every aspect we can think about. Between the bus and the bus stop, the bus really, if you think about it, is an interior room that traverses the city. And as it traverses the city, you're seeing episodes of the city, places where real histories took place, sometimes tragedies took place, and how many times do you cross those paths and you're not even aware of that narrative? So this idea of having to activate the bus as this interior room that actually tells of the history of the city was something we're super interested in. And this is just a photo montage that I did that would start to depict this multi-frame reading from the interior of the bus back into the city. Now, the public elevator is another interesting microcommon in the city. And those, if you're familiar with downtown, those are the parking structures near the downtown area. And each of them, you can see the number of spaces each of them has. So think about how many people cycle through those structures on a daily basis. So we thought, how could we activate those spaces and make people aware of someone else who was in that space? So we thought about designing what we called an elevator insert. So it's almost this interlocking system that is like a puzzle, and a user could come and shuffle it, and someone else, it's just like carrying that memory of use with each occupant throughout the city. So we designed this. It's still, we didn't build it or anything, but we're interested in those conditions. Also in this project, I started a collaboration with DIA, which is a local design firm, and the Knoxville Happiness Project, which is a local nonprofit organization. And we're really trying to look at different nodes in the city that we can activate in interesting ways to start to create a larger dialogue and more engagement in a micro scale, but with great impact. The project is currently, thanks to Julie, still on exhibit in the UT Downtown Window Gallery. And this is a picture, this is an untouched picture. That space is amazing, and that space is a microcommon in its own right. So what you're seeing here is the reflection between the two gallery spaces, and it really, this picture captured that reading. This is more of the gallery exhibit. Both my displacement research and that of the microcommons have allowed me to better understand emerging interior territories and challenge the impasse of spatial assignments and dispose of the exclusionary logic of the single architectural space in favor of multivalent spaces. Gauging interior architecture from the premise of multivalence and agility offers fertile territory for design exploration. In the article, The Changing Room Towards an Interior Multiplicity, published in Interiors Journal, I made a case for the need for multivalent interiority, unrestricted by programmatic typology. The premise for this interiority and its itinerant components were learned from refugee shelters and became a requirement for all of us as we navigated the era of the pandemic, where the collision of programmatic spaces happened and the overlapping of physical and virtual setting took place. I should have taken, there we go. The sinuous overlap between cultural identities and digital tools is indispensable to our current state of being, and is central to a contemporary human syntax. I have traced this intersection further in a 2021 Idea Journal article, trying to understand a new type of interiority I dubbed screenteriors. Screenteriors are hybrid virtual and physical spaces we occupy simultaneously. Our hybrid registries formulate an alternate routing to place, changing the very politics of identity and belonging. Yet another lesson learned from my studies of displacement and refugee camps. The prevalence of the amalgamated virtual and analog settings reached a new pinnacle with the onset of the COVID pandemic. So during this period, the requisite withdrawal from physical setting placed an unequivocal demand on our interior spaces. Our interiors, augmented with various technological devices and platforms, became primary nodes for public exchanges and the place for everything from work to school to social activities. Today, we find ourselves inside these new territories, occupying the world in multi-frames, is a new normal that places interiors within and without the physical bound of their architecture. And this is actually this got published in the article, but this is also part of the work that students have done in an independent study course that I taught in spring of 21, where we really start to study the impact of like occupying those virtual spaces and how our bodies even are changing. So the way you dress is from the waist up, or the, you know, truthfully so. And you start to like create avatars and alternate realities. And those are all enabled by this amalgamation that I talked about. The set of images here are conceptual images of familiar scenes. So you could recognize our building, and then you could recognize a landscape. And the other one in pink is actually a generic Zoom background that you can get to hide your messy room or what have you. And the other one was actually from a review we had on Zoom. So what I did is develop this simple script where it kind of tracked my time and occupancy of virtual space, and every time I would click, it would segment the image. So what this kind of depicts, this is sort of a format of what a virtual occupancy over a duration of time for me looked like. This is over a course of 8 hours. And that was also published as part of that Idea Journal article. So the last of my stories is set in the present, but what you are seeing is a walk through Old City in Amman. Being in interior architecture for the past 7 years, I have gained an immense appreciation for interiority, understanding interiors as dynamic realms. To read the city through its interiorities pauses a beauty all its own, a thick atmosphere of unspoken burdens and bliss. What makes up this place, as with most places, are the interactions, tensions, and synergies of its multi-physical and abstract interior layers. The city's interiority, transient, sublime, simultaneously loud and subtle, present and absent, nomadic, is a state of continuous becoming, leaving traces within you and taking some from you. And this is my chapter 3 for this evening. I could never get my country out of me. I became a citizen in 2003, and I am still nostalgic to my country. I miss the smell of Old Town Amman. My dad is a dentist who had a clinic in one of those alleys that you've seen, and I remember this fondly, and I sincerely miss it. So when I was here, I decided to do a project that actually, this was before the pandemic, this project was in 2018, that linked Knoxville to Amman, Jordan, in an interesting way. And I called it was done in collaboration with Kramer Woodard, who was my mentor and teacher from the University of New Mexico, and my research assistant, Scott Hickman. But we called it the Coniferous Landscape, understanding a new understanding of the sublime. So what we tried to do with this project is document the sound of a certain landscape. And we looked back at John Cage's way of staging sound moments to document a certain experience, and we were really inspired by that. So we designed those series of vessels that actually take the sound and echoes it through this metal, what would I call it? I call it a metal vessel. So it kind of reverberates through that metal vessel, and it's activated by sensors. And it was really inspired by rethinking what the sublime is. What does it mean to be enclosed in this sound that encloses you and defines you? So when it came, and this is another picture of the vessels and John Cage in one of his concerts. But when we designed the sound, and a part of me, again, I said I could never separate from my country. I feel nostalgic to the call of prayer. The Islamic call of prayer goes off 4 times a day, and it reverberates through the landscape. Amman, the capital, is a very, it's erected on 7 hills, so it's very topographic. And when the sound of prayer goes, it doesn't just go, it reverberates. You are part of it, and it's unavoidable. I mean, it keeps running and running. So when we decided of documenting that Coniferous landscape, looking back at the sound of the call of the Islamic call of prayer was my sublime, and it was something that I wanted to document in this installation. So the landscape here are actually recreations. What you're seeing in the upper are the mosques in Amman, and sort of where the circles are just are different mosques, and the sort of the spectrum of the sound they introduced. So I took segment of this topography and milled it, and that became, along with the metal vessel, that became how the sound got moved through those series of vessels that we created and were able to install. This too was on exhibit a few years back at the Downtown Gallery. And I want to end here with my research. I mean, this is where I would like to end with that part of this lecture. And I don't know how I'm doing on time, because I like, go ahead, okay. I'll be quick. So my teaching has spanned different levels throughout my time here. But mostly I taught in first year and then upper level in interiors. So in first year, which is a class that I co-coordinate first year with James Rose, we started co-coordinating together, when was it? 3 years ago? More? Longer? It was. And I mean, I teach the representation aspect of that class. And when I took that on, I love representation, but I also love the story representation tells. So when I was thinking about how to structure the curriculum for Architecture 121 and 122, it was done with a few ideas in mind. I wanted to make first-year students aware of time-based design fluency, assemblage and fabrication, visual logic, spatial dynamics, and history and theory. And that was, I would try to weave that in one year-long evolution of assignments. So each of those, there's 6 assignments here, and those are snippets from first-year work. And each of them deals with one specific theme. So one of the first projects that all first-year students encounter, or has encountered for the last few years that I was teaching this, is an assignment where I asked them to reinterpret a painting surface, and create topographies based on that. This teaches them about organization and composition, and it also is teaching them like Rhino in a speed of light. And I know they hate me for it, but they learn it quick and well, and it works. In addition to that, I weave things like fabrication, learning how to laser cut. And here's the dilemma, is routing 145 students through 2 laser cutters with, I mean, it's like a bottleneck in the college, but I think that became some of the traditions that we came to expect. But after we analyze and build those topographies in Rhino, students actually get a chance to build an extra credit model and cut them and try to understand basic and primary ideas of section and plan. The second project actually deals with movements. And what we do is we take a series of Moybridge photographs, and I ask the students to diagram them. And that becomes a way to teach them about surfaces in Rhino, but also another way to allow them to understand how our bodies make and establish spaces around them. And I really focus on not only teaching them digital skills, although we start with digital skills, I'm really also interested in teaching them a hybrid way of working. So we started towards the 3rd assignment of the first semester. We transitioned more into hand drawings that is influenced and informed by virtual making as well. So those are all a series of assignments that deal with that. Moving on to the 2nd semester of first year, assemblage and construction becomes integral. The students get a number of pattern drawing that at first I ask them to draw their interpretation of what they see in them. I choose vague drawings on purpose, and I don't know what an engine looks like. Someone told me that's an engine. I just don't know what, they just are images that are interesting. And I give them to the students, and the students start to interpolate interesting formation from that. Then we actually go and build them right to every screw and nut and bolt in Rhino. So this is where they really start to learn about tectonics, construction, dimensioning, and after that we go into not only clipping plane images, those are really cut plans and sections that the students spend countless hours cutting and cleaning up and making, and we really study that generative object in many ways. But what I actually dubbed this assignment reading section, because the image that the student gets is a section of a pattern drawing, and they can interpret it in whatever way they want. So one drawing given to 100 students will give you a different result every time based on what they see or how they interpret those drawings. Oh, and last part is I asked them to superimpose the object in a space of the building. So that's what they're doing here. So we learn things like exploded axonometrics. We learn about photography and perspective because they have to match a perspective of the generated object with the photograph they take. The other assignment that was in 122 is an assignment where we actually go outside and sketch. And at first when I started teaching this, I didn't have any sketches assignments. And to my surprise, student asked for them. So that tells you that although digital mediums are still prevalent, the hand is indisposable. I mean, it is really still imperative for us to teach students how to sketch. This assignment is dubbed 4 minutes and 33 seconds because when we go around campus, we're spending that much time just sketching very quick sketches that the students go back and clean up later. But the idea is like, look and document. Don't think. Just do it really quick and fast. And after that, they actually generate detailed drawing of imaginative spaces, but after we engage in a quick sketching exercise. Then at some point, we do precedent studies, but it's a different precedent analysis, but it's a different take on that, where representation becomes a key factor of re-understanding and reinterpreting buildings. So we do 2 sets, one that actually studies the architecture and one that studies a narrative that is out there. You know, so you'll see the Farnsworth House sinking or the Broad as a different iteration covered with animal skins. But it is, again, that idea of pushing representation and the logic of representation beyond what is seen towards what's interpolated. This assignment I used a few times, but I didn't use it as of late, but I do try to teach them about datascapes and formula-driven geometries. So this is where they code their form, and we used that briefly. It was a success for 1 semester, then it didn't work so well. But again, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is you learn and adjust. In terms of interior architecture, those are just areas that I'm interested in and advance in my teaching of interior architecture. When I started my job here in 2015, I was teaching at the University of New Mexico since 2004, but I never taught in interiors. I mean, the University of New Mexico does not have an interiors program. So when I came to the university, I gained, and this is a lot to say about my colleagues, I learned an appreciation for interiors, and I learned to love it in ways that I've never experienced before. But another thing I wanted to do when I taught it is also to teach students new ways of thinking about those interior environments and really push their agency and their command over the architecture that they intervene within. So those are a few projects. That's actually one project by Scott Hickman for an intervention for a theater space in the fireproof storage building. This is another project from that same year by Patrick Keogh. Again, an intervention in the fireproof storage building. And again, what I'm trying to teach them is like, how could the interior inform the architecture, starting from the inside out? This was done, I want to say, in fall 2017. Another project that I often did with the students, with third-year interior architecture students, is one that studies natural phenomena. And this one specifically, we were looking at bioluminescence creatures and trying to transform those lighting strategies as diagram to inform the design, the reappropriation of also the fireproof building in this case. And this piece of furniture is the archive where we collected all the studies that the student did. This project is by Lyndon Klehr. Oh, okay. And it's, again, like the intervention of that theater space in the interior of the fireproof building. And what I wanted to show with this is interior students do everything. They're really an amazing group of thinkers. And we do site analysis, we do exploring building fabrication. So it's a set of comprehensive way of learning about space and making space that starts from the inside out. Later on, I started to become braver in teaching interiors and took on some more challenging buildings, one of which is the Sun Sphere. I love and hate the Sun Sphere, both at the same time, and decided to take it and turn it into an open-air aviary and research facility. So those are some of the projects that were generated from that semester. This one is by Adrienne Savage, and this one is by J.C. Park. And they're all rooted in process. So in this project, I asked them to start looking at natural landscape and turning those into the interior strategy that they employed in redefining the sun sphere. This project is from fall 19, and it's by Danielle Lanier. And what we did in that project is we designed a prime air facility and headquarters. So part of the building remained as a distribution center, and the other part was to serve as offices and headquarters for Amazon. And this facility was to rely on drones, prime air, which relies on drones to deliver packages. And those are, this is another of that project by Isabel Huzman, and the same project, again, for the prime air facility. More recently, with my students, again, like I always think of how to expand the teaching of interiors and how to teach it in new ways. Most recently, last fall, I collaborated with a Lebanese architect. His name is Antoine Sarafim, and I wanted to do a building in Lebanon. And this building that you see here is called the Egg. And it exists right on the Green Line, which is sort of the line of separation between the Muslim sector of Beirut and the Christian sector. Beirut was under civil war for many decades. And instead, we couldn't go there. Obviously, we couldn't go there. But Anthony actually took us through his phone on a Zoom morning through the streets of Beirut and through the building. And this is some of the video that we got from that Zoom session. But it was a really interesting experience to read that building, to read that space, going back to the articles that I talked about of how do you start to occupy those spaces in different ways and different understandings. So some of the projects that the students produced, this was the redesigning of the Egg building as a headquarters for the War and Peace Reporting Agency, which is a famous agency in the Middle East that reports about stories in the Middle East region. And this project is by Faith Stevenson, again, taking and reappropriating this building in very interesting ways. This project from the same semester by Elizabeth Walker, and another project by Mariam Saya. I always get your name wrong, Mariam. Saya Hagatar. Did I get it right? All right, apologies. But again, taking this building and reappropriate it in interesting ways with Anthony's tour in mind and his feedback. And another project by James Savadoba for the same. And each student dealt with different parameters. Some were interested in climate like he was. Others were more leaning towards the politics. So it's really an open exploration that students bring to the front of those classes. Another thing that I teach is interior, is our beloved construction document studio. And this is sort of, I think, the equivalent of integrations in architecture. So it's a demanding studio where we have to take students through design and construction documents. And here, the premise of this studio was taking patterns and converting them into 3D spaces and moving, again, from conceptual stages all the way to CDs. I also collaborated for this project. The project was designing a class, a microschool, which a microschool is a microschool that houses students of many age together in a one-room kind of space. And we collaborated with the local principal, Brenda Murphy, who you can see here, and her students would meet with us and give us feedback. And we also had a collaboration with Crossville Tile. So to set this up, not only did we have to meet the CDs part, which were hard as they are, we also had to work with Crossville to reinvent the use of tile, and also had to satisfy Brenda's demand for her school and her student. And that all collided, which is very much like what happens in real professional life. And my demands as a teacher of getting something provocative out there. So they started again with patterning and re-envisioning different spaces. Each student came with different ideas. I love Elizabeth Hankel's work because she took the Crossville tile and she was interested of how light actually reflected over it. So a lot of students' instinct was, how could we take the tile to the water jet and cut it in an interesting way? Her response was, I'm going to explore lighting and let the reflective tile create a topography that is different. So you could see her earlier studies here. And ultimately, yes, it does make its way to reality with a complete set of CDs that the students design. This is another project by Nicholas Stoldi, also designing for the micro school, and he focused on designing a microecology focused school, and starting with incorporating a lot of green elements and spaces, and again, you see his set of CDs. I'm going to skim through this, but I have to talk about the Urban Future studio, which was done in collaboration with Gensler in the spring of 2020. That studio was really incredible in every mean. Gensler sponsored the studio, and we directly worked with principals from Gensler and a team of brilliant interior architecture and architecture students. So we would collaborate often in the early pre-pandemic, like spring 2020, we started off no pandemic. Midway through, everything turned upside down. But we felt very secure because we actually started the semester collaborating online with Gensler, which kind of helped us in many ways. So the students took 4 different buildings in 4 different cities, and Jordan Goldstein helped me develop, me and him developed actually the studio brief together. So this was the Lever House reimagined as an Uber Air airport, which is actually a real project that Gensler was doing pre-pandemic. So that was their iteration of the Lever House. This was the 1111 Lincoln Road parking structure by Herzog and Demara in Miami. The student turned it into an urban fishery. And this was the Michigan Grand Central Station turned as an agrarian urban hub where drones actually cultivate a massive green wall, and like suggesting that Detroit is going to evolve into an agrarian urban hub. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to stop for a second, but this was the last one that we did in LA, and it was turning a mall that actually Gensler did, but into a community center and a drone hub. But here's what was interesting about this project. Sorry, go back. I mean, those were students proposing those ideas with professionals that are practicing, and not once, you know, Jordan that you see here in the picture, they were encouraging those amazing, you know, pioneering ideas and not discouraging the students from them. So with their support, we were actually able to take those proposals and make them into really interesting architectures. And we actually got the work together in a book that is, I don't think we have any hard copies left, but it is published online. And the students really benefited, despite of the pandemic that you can see in the timeline kind of hit right where it actually hurt the progress of the studio. But I think the students overcame in many interesting ways. And I like Callie's comment where she said, we started the semester with thinking about resilient environment, and resiliency became the adjective for all of us in a matter of months due to the pandemic. I'll skim through this. Again, pending time, I can go on or good. So this is another studio that I taught about reappropriating oil structure in different cities. That was in spring of 21. We also looked at the colossal oil structure that's going to be left behind after hopefully we achieve oil dependency in 2050. But we worked in New York, in Williamsburg, New York, Houston, Los Angeles, and Santa Barbara. And fourth-year interior architecture students reimagined the use of, this is the Exxon Humble building in Houston, which was the Exxon Mobil headquarters. And the students reimagined it as a emergency shelter for the hurricanes that occur in Houston. This is one of the rigs that we worked, that one group of students worked with off the Santa Barbara coast. And they reimagined it as a natural refuge for animals. And this is another of that Santa Barbara rig project, and the students reimagined it as actually a high-end spa and mineral harvesting farm. So colliding those two programs together. This building that we also worked on is actually a building in LA. You can see a snippet of it here. But this is not a building. This is a fake facade for an oil derrick. So an oil well right in LA by residential neighborhoods. So the students reimagined it as a community farm. And the last one was the abandoned, what was this? Sorry. This was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and it was reappropriating those abandoned, I forgot what to call them. They're used for natural gas storage, and then they got abandoned over time. And the student reimagined them also as housing and greenscapes for the community. I teach also every now and then. I'm lucky enough to teach an independent study class, and I really push my students to rethink how we approach our environments, how we take interiority and use it as a premise to challenge disparities and push it forward. We talked about things like gender, the idea of commoning public space, the idea of dispensable communities. So we develop, in those classes, we develop the writing and the images simultaneously, and this is just a snippet of those classes. And when I chair thesis project, which I was lucky to do a few times, again, I encourage this, the students come to me interested in interiority to start with. But again, we encourage this language of taking ownership of the interior space and pushing it further to really rethink the way we experience space through the lens of interiority. So a few of those thesis projects. And this was the latest one by Patrick Keogh. And I'm going to end here with one final statement. I want to say that I hold that design education has given me a voice and a place at the table. This awareness fuels my commitment to extend architecture and its outreach to others, facilitating their passage into a discipline that's central to negotiating collective individual identities and establishing an active civic agency. And that is all I have tonight, and I thank you all for your attention and your presence.
Okay, questions from the audience.
I just have a short statement rather than a question. I just wanted to thank you for being the voice that you never had, and I hope to forever hear everything that you do, because you are the foundation that built everything that we ever will have in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Nadine.
Thank you for that. Please, did you raise your hand?
Rana, that was an awesome presentation.
Thanks,
Congratulations.
Liz. Thank you.
As you were thinking and talking about refugees and agency and temporality there, and then looking at the work in your studios and how the agency is happening with the architect or the designer with all of the formal moves. I'm probably not articulating this well, but I'm thinking about the difference between letting the user make the changes and additions to the environment versus somebody that's trained, and how you consider that gradient.
So if I understand correctly, it's also the variation, or taking the research more into the studio, or I mean, this is ongoing for me, because I struggled with this. I mean, I was educated in the same system. I went to school in an American university, and learned architecture as the sole authority. So I'm trying to come to terms with what that alternate means, or what it could look like. And I think for me, doing the research about the refugees actually gave me a sense that, I mean, I can help, but I can't dictate. So how could I be a facilitator instead of a design dictator? You know, because that's to some degree what we do. So I'm trying to come to terms with that. In terms of interiors, actually has offered me a venue where space it's more malleable. I mean, I was trained in architecture, and I love architecture. I miss it every now and then. So here you have me on the book saying that. But again, you know, interiority has a temporality to it that actually is super productive as we even navigate this new era of whether it's creating resilience through buildings or whether rethinking how we occupy space and move away from programmatic assignments. So all of those are ideas I'm coming to terms with. And I'm hoping to teach it to the students. Maybe I haven't done it yet to a full degree because I'm trying to come to terms with it myself. But I think that's a very, very important point. And for all of us as designers, as we move on to this new era where design is a more collaborative and co-produced in interesting ways.
Any questions on that side of the room or comments? So, Rana, I am curious, I appreciate that you said that you are who you are because of your life experience, your life experiences, and how they shape the way that you look at design and spaces and in habitation and occupation. Now that you have been in Knoxville for 7 years, and now that you have been an educator in Knoxville for 7 years, what are the things that you think that moving forward define this experience, the immediate experience of being a new Knoxvillian?
I have to say when I moved, here's the honest truth. When I moved here, I didn't know much about the American South. So my experience has been exclusively in New Mexico. I lived 18 years there, which New Mexico, I thought New Mexico was the American South, but it wasn't apparently. But I thought, when coming here, I had, maybe that was a blessing that I didn't have any understanding of what this environment entails. So I learned about it bit by bit simultaneously as I developed my acumen in teaching interiors. So it was those past years to me was a process of learning and growing in many ways. Now I forgot your question, but I did introduction, so if you don't mind repeating part of it.
Just moving forward, how this experience is shaping you. How the last 7 years is shaping the Rana of 2025.
Yeah, it is exactly what I said. I'm learning again to rethink how we approach spaces, how we approach spatial thinking in a way to include people, but at the same time to have a voice in this negotiation, but to also include others. And one thing that I didn't say in the refugee project is every time you look in Google and research refugee projects, they look a certain way. They have to look run down, and I took on this project with the intention of changing that reading. I wanted them to read differently. I wanted them to convey different ideas about refugee and a different narrative. So it's that same thinking that I want to carry on, and I think this past year has empowered me to do that. And thanks to all of you, really, to the students, my colleagues, my mentors. I'm here because of you. I'm not saying this it's truly the case.
So this is kind of related to Maged's lecture or tenure lecture. Based on your experience with Knoxville, what's your future goals with tenure and research and
I am currently still working with the microcommons project. So that is still, we want to explore that further and really look at ways to activate more and build some of those interventions, hopefully. So that's in the short term. In the long term, I'm really hoping to expand also global engagement and bring this idea that in that project, the Coniferous landscape, where two places collide in interesting ways. I'm interested in bringing that in as well, but I'm not done either with the refugee project. So I have many pieces left to be resolved that, as I've learned, they also inform each other in interesting ways. So those are the short-term goals, I guess. And hopefully we'll open ways for longer-term ones, too.
I just wanted to say that it's nice to see these lectures and to kind of see, come back to some of the work that's previously done. Oh, sorry. It's nice to see some of these lectures because of how they go back and talk about student work and what we really could have learned about that, some things that we may have missed while going through it. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
as for my question, your works to me seems to have like a strong sense of emotional tie into it. And I want to know of how have you in your life kept that empowered, I guess, would be the best word I could say for it, but I'm bad with words, but yeah.
Yeah. This is also a hard question because I wasn't empowered. I started architecture school as a very shy person. I mean, I came here when I was 18 to the US. So that's what I'm trying to convey is architecture school, design has given me a voice. It enabled me here today to stand in front of you and talk about work that I'm passionate about and that I grew to love. I don't think I would be here without that. So I mean, this is to all of you. This profession gave me a voice that I intend to keep employing in different ways to serve others. So yes, I get passionate. I mean, I get emotional talking about that because I remember myself in a bathroom stall at a first-year review crying my eyes out because I'm afraid to stand and present my project. I mean, and that is the difference, you know, like I went to school in '96, don't figure out my age here, but the '96 person then and the person who stands before you right now is one that was shaped by design and architecture in many interesting ways. And that is, again, something that I try to preach to my students and practice myself. So I hope that answered your question.
Any other question? So, Rana, I want to thank you again for being such an amazing educator, for helping us shape the next generation of designers. And I would like to end with something a little bit unorthodox. Can you sit over there and when I can take a photo of the entire room?
Oh.
So you have all the people who stay until the very end to listen to you.